So that term archetypes, I'm sure, is something you've all heard about often, and something that I speak about a lot. And very simply put, an archetype is a god or a goddess, a personification, usually of some abstract principle. So it could be the archetype of motherhood. So, for example, the goddess Demeter. And generally I speak about the classical Greek and Roman pantheon, just because that's what I know and love. But of course there are many different pantheons from all different cultures, and if you have a preference for another pantheon, do work with that. But generally speaking, the principles are the same, because the archetypes, the gods and goddesses, are basically forces of nature, personifications of life and being, like justice, for example, or learning to use personal power, or learning to strategize and to create in our lives. I'm going to talk about 16 archetypes, so that might be a way for you to get an idea of what archetype you want to work with. But basically the archetypes are powerhouses of energy. They are impersonal energies, like gods or goddesses, that exist, that represent certain ways of being. And when people, for example, worship a god or a goddess, they are sort of standing in front of an impersonal force, a greater force than their ego, and asking that greater force for help and assistance. And that's obviously just really condensed into a nutshell. But that is what we are doing here. We are saying, I want to develop certain qualities, or I want to enhance certain qualities that I already have. And from my place of ego, I can't necessarily do that, but I'm going to learn from this greater archetype in order for me to cultivate the qualities that I want. And again, those archetypes are forces of nature that exist beyond us. They're independent of us. But when we call them, when we think about them, we kind of enter their stream. We start to channel them more and more. They start to fill us up with information, with knowing, with messages, also with kind of miracles and events that happen in our lives that open doors for us. And there is always very much a dialogue with the world out there when we start to make these changes, when we start to call for change in our lives. We will start to see the opportunities, the shifts in our lives. And those will either be shifts that kind of enhance the flow of what it is that we're asking for, or otherwise that will block that flow. And when we get that blockage, that can be one of two things. It can be, let's say, the archetype or the divine saying to us, this isn't necessarily an area that you should go in, or this isn't necessarily the best for you at this time, it's not the time. Or it could be your own ego resistance to something. For example, if you have always had very negative beliefs about abundance and money, and you start to open or call the archetype of money or abundance to help you grow, and then the blockages come in, it's actually those deeper belief patterns that kind of sit down here, that sit in the unconscious, potentially, that's saying, no, I can't have money, I can't have abundance, that doesn't fit my self-concept. I believed it was good to be poor, or I believed it was more noble to have nothing, and therefore I'm not going to accept this new belief system. So again, that's where we enter the struggle of the head saying, okay, it's fine to have abundance, and the old conditioned belief saying, no, I'm not allowed to have it. So again, what we do with that struggle is we call in the divine breath, which is also the divine, which is also this higher frequency mind. We start calling that into our body, calling it into our deeper belief systems, to start bringing about a shift. But when we specifically call an archetype, we're actually adding an extra channel of energy. We're adding an extra sort of powerhouse to our arsenal in order for us to grow even more. So, we're not just relying on our own ego ability to make change. We are calling on an impersonal force with a very specific function to help us make some changes in our lives. So, when people lived very close to nature, when people lived in ways, that are kind of unimaginable for us, where people were kind of at the mercy of the world out there a whole lot more, people called on these archetypes a whole lot more. And that's why we have these so-called polytheistic religions, religions with many different gods and goddesses, because those different gods and goddesses represent different aspects of the psyche, different aspects of nature, different aspects of the growth process. Therefore, when there's a lack of a certain energy in our lives, or in the lives of these people, it's the same thing. We can start to cultivate them by calling in those support energies. When you've got monotheism, it kind of creates a bit of a distortion. Even though, I do believe that probably all the polytheistic religions were monotheistic in essence. They believed there was a greater god, goddess behind everything, but then there were these different facets, these different expressions, almost like the different fingers of the god, goddess coming in and having different expressions in life. These different facets were areas that we could cultivate, but there is this bigger transpersonal god, goddess. So yes, I do believe that we have this greater power, but then that greater power has different expressions in the world. And monotheism, has created the distortion of, there's only one way, there's only one God, there's a right and a wrong, there's one truth only, and there's not sort of a myriad of different ways of expressing different areas of your life. In more pagan or polytheistic religions, you've got archetypes of the trickster, you've got the divine prostitute, you've got, all these different expressions that we judge in society. But of course, you've also got the other so-called more noble expressions. So I'm going to do a run through of the 16 main Greek archetypes. Again, there are always correspondences in different pantheons, be they Egyptian or African or Native American, etc. Usually there are very strong correspondences because these are expressing sort of essential human types and ways of being. But the reason why I want to go through these archetypes is so that maybe you can get a sense of which archetype you would like to work with. That could be an archetype that is your core expression, and you might want to explore and develop your core expression more, or it might be an archetype that you need to develop and that you want to cultivate in your life. So, generally speaking, we as humans have a particular core expression. That's who we fundamentally are, regardless of our environment, regardless of our training, regardless of what we've learned from our family. We have a core archetype that just says, this is who I am and this is who I want to be. And we always see this, for example, the common example is, people that grow up in very, let's say, rational, conventional families who decide they want to be artists. Or maybe people grow up in a family that's sort of very geared towards farming. But then, you as the individual realize that you really want to be an engineer or a lawyer. That's because you've got a particular way of thinking. Your archetype is driving you to have a particular purpose and mission in the world. So that is kind of the core expression. That is kind of the you that has developed regardless of your direct environment. And that's maybe an expression that you keep coming back to in your life at different stages. But then we also have the archetypes of what we need to develop now, what is lacking in our lives, or what are areas that we feel we need strength. So I'm going to go through some of these Greek archetypes. I'm going to go through them via element. The element of air is where we'll start, and the first one in the element of air is Zeus, and Zeus represents authority. Zeus it's kind of a very expansive, powerful energy. It's about creating order. It's about you taking the reins in your life and saying, this is how I want my life to be, and I'm going to figure out the ways to create this life. He's also the god of fertility. He's known for his many kind of affairs and dalliances, and that doesn't necessarily mean it's about promiscuity. It actually just means that he has the flow of energy, the abundance, to generate all of these different ways and to generate all these opportunities and these different energies. And basically all the Olympian gods, which are the principal gods of Greek mythology, are related to him, either children or married to him, etc. So Zeus is kind of central. So Zeus is that life force. And of course we must remember that the gods and the goddesses are impersonal expressions of energies, and they may have become more personalized over the years, and humans may have projected stories onto them, and those stories are always illustrative, but these represent more impersonal principles. So some of these archetypes or gods or goddesses might turn us off because of the personality aspect, but it's also important to look beyond just the personality aspect. Zeus's wife is Hera, and she is the goddess of relationships. She's the goddess of kind of order in relationships, stable relationships, creating a home, creating a family. And of course, let's remember that these archetypes also don't relate to gender. So, if you're a woman and you want to work with Zeus, obviously there's no issue there. Zeus has just got a male expression because that's how the pantheon has kind of developed. So Hera is the goddess of relationships, the goddess of creating a home, creating a family, creating stability, also about creating a boundary, an emotional boundary in life, a comfortable, strong emotional boundary. So for example, if you feel that your emotional life is too up and down, that there's too much chaos, either internally, emotionally, or in your relationships, you could work with that Hera energy in order to create the stability in your relationships, to create more flow, to create more intimacy. Hera has an energy of creating the strength, the stability, the order. Just as Zeus is king of the gods, Hera is queen of the gods. So she also brings stability into that home space. Next we have Athena, who is kind of the opposite of Hera. She is an example of a Greek goddess who is very much independent. She is intelligent. She uses her intelligence and her skills and abilities to find her way in the world. And for example, if you're in a codependent relationship and you want to move out of that relationship and you want to kind of create your own career or your own space in the world, Athena is a goddess that you would work with. Athena represents, on the one hand, wisdom and intelligence. It tends to be a more head type of intelligence. It's not as intuitive as perhaps Hera. But Athena is very much about creating the independence, developing wisdom and knowledge, and then from there being able to strategize and to plan your life. So for example, if you feel you're too emotional at times and you need to kind of sit down and order your life, sort of develop some of the structures that you need in your life in order for you to grow and be independent, that is an energy that you would work with. She's got that sense of looking into the future, planning for the future, strategizing. But she's also got a sense of, being a goddess of war. She creates strength and protection and the ability to fight the good fight, to fight for what is important. So she creates a protection as well, and a strong sense of focus and being able to move forward regardless of any of the obstacles or the things that are holding you back. Whereas, for example, Hera, she would be thinking in terms of the greater good, family, relationships. How would my actions affect my relationships? Then the fourth god of air is Hermes, and he is the trickster. He's the messenger god. He's the god of communication. He's the god of intellect. Hermes is the traveler. So, for example, if you want to loosen things up in your life, if you need more travel or you want to explore new ideas, you would call on that energy of Hermes in order to go beyond the boundaries. He's very much the god of stepping over the boundaries, stepping beyond the borders in order to explore new things, gain new information, make connections with new areas of life. So, for example, if you've been very career orientated and you want to learn to develop new ways of being for yourself, you would work with Hermes, to break out of the familiar and then to try something new. He's the god of learning new skills and abilities. He's the god of languages, the god of, crossing the borders of culture and exploring new cultures and exploring different ways of being. He's also the guide of the soul. So he is kind of a shamanic god. So he, takes one between worlds. He protects one in that journey into the underworld, or that journey into the heavens and into the divine beyond. He's also the trickster. So he is the god of humor. He's the god of thieves and liars. He's the god that kind of plays a little bit with the boundaries of good and bad, so-called good and bad. So if you need to be very eloquent and you need to, be a little bit creative with the truth, that Hermes would help you in that regard. So those are the elements of air. There we can see already all of those gods and goddesses have a little bit more of an air aspect to them. Air is not only the intellect, it's also communication, it's also that sense of justice, the sense of order, which comes from air in general. In order to create justice, you need to think things through, you need to establish rules, you need to, sort of create a common order. Air is also about the brotherhood and sisterhood of humanity, so it's got a humanitarian aspect to it as well. Then we'll go to the gods and goddesses of fire, and the first one there is Hephaestos. Hephaestos is the smith of the gods, meaning he's kind of the alchemist. He uses fire in order to transform. But in mythology, he was lame and he was actually quite ugly. Hera threw him out of heaven because his ugly appearance offended her, so he became lame as a result. But his lameness caused him to develop other abilities and skills. So he became a great craftsman, a great smith. So he used fire in order to transform the lower metals into objects of beauty and objects of magic, in fact. So his energy is very much about transmuting the lower energy, being lame and, being ores, metal ores, and turning them into something magical and beautiful. So his energy is very much about transmuting. It's very much about artistry. For me, that card also, or that energy, really represents using your manual abilities, using your hands to channel spirit, to channel a higher self, and then to transform raw materials into something new. So it's about taking inspiration and then creating something very physical out of it. So that could be through art, that could be through crafts, that could be through gardening. It's some form of material expression of inspiration. So you get some other gods and goddesses which are more pure inspiration, but Hephaestos, or Vulcan for the Romans, is about taking inspiration and turning it into something tangible and something that you can touch. Then next we have Hestia, who's also a goddess of fire. She's literally the goddess of the eternal flame, and she contemplates fire. She sits in her own space with fire, and that is her journey of self-exploration and self-expression. So if in your life, for example, you need reflection, you need quiet time, you need to make sense out of sort of all the thoughts, all the chaos of your life, you need meditation, you call on the energy of Hestia. It's about being still, but it's also about not being influenced by conventional religion or dogmatic thought systems. It's about sitting with that fire by yourself and coming to your own understanding of who you are intimately, regardless of external influences, so that you can then find your own inner flame. And of course, you might need to start by contemplating an external flame first, then connecting to your own inner flame, and then as that inner flame expands, you start to radiate your own flame, your own fire. And that of course is when we become more enlightened. So Hestia is about the flame, the eternal flame, cultivating it first, understanding it, and then letting it spread into your life and letting it transform your life. And again, fire, the element of fire in general is always about transmutation. It's about bringing in light. It's about living our passion more. It's about energy and kind of activity in the world. So it's a little bit more of an extroverted element as opposed to, let's say, water, which is more emotional. The next one is Apollo. He is on the one hand the god of the sun, but he's also the god of the arts and of beauty and of poetry, and of taking, again, the raw materials and turning it into something sublime. He's a little bit different to Hephaestos. Hephaestos is more, it's kind of the raw work. It's kind of maybe got more of an element of hard work in order to sublimate. Apollo is more about really refining and really taking something up to a higher level. It's like incredible levels of inspiration. Using the mind, the intellect to think things through and to plan, and then to create beauty out of that and to allow your life to become beautiful. So Apollo is very much the very civilized person. A little bit different to Athena. Athena is civilized, but maybe more in sort of a lawyerish way, or sort of really, being in the corporate world, being in the world of action. Apollo is a little bit more artistic, and it's a little bit more about creating beauty and grace in the world. And it's like the sun, the sun brings joy and success and happiness. Athena, as a contrast, is very much about a very specific focus. Apollo is more, the joy, the beauty of being, and having, I guess, the leisure in to create beauty. Athena's kind of at war, so she doesn't have the luxury of that grace, let's say. She's got a very specific thing. So let's say you want to work with shifting your life. If you've got very important projects at hand, or if your back's a little bit against the wall, or if there's a sense of urgency, you would work with Athena. Once you've reached a level of success that you would need Athena to bring you in the first place, once you've reached a certain level of success, then that archetype could become more Apollo, which is more about sort of the fine things in life and really celebrating your success in the world. And then we've got Ares, Mars. He's the god of war. So on the one hand, yes, he's the god of war. He could be a god of aggression. He could be an energy that you use to help balance out your aggression. But on the other hand, he's the god of getting things done, of really taking action, of having a lot of energy, a lot of fire to get things done in the world. So if that seems that there are huge obstacles that you need to overcome, or if you're moving home, or if you just need a lot of energy, you would call on Ares to help you put that energy into the world and to let your fire burn bright. It's not a very refined fire, but it's a powerful fire. So it could be kind of brutish or clumsy in some ways, but sometimes that's just what's necessary in order to get things done. So that's real life force, real vital force energy to give you strength and to carry you forward. Next, we go to the gods and goddesses of water. So the gods and goddesses of water, the first one is Poseidon. Poseidon is the god of the sea. So that is about the greater depths of the ocean, the greater depths of your own emotion, a more mature expression of emotion that comes into your life. So if you found in the past that your emotions have been erratic, or they've been all over the place, you would work with Poseidon in order to bring in a more mature, a more fulfilling form of emotional expression. It's also got a little bit of a fathering or mothering energy, so it's kind of about either being a parent, or it's about just being able to love fully and in a very mature way. It's not the same as romantic love. You know, there are other gods and goddesses for romantic love. Poseidon is that kind of mature love. You know, maybe it's the love that develops after 10 or 20 years of a relationship. It's that next phase that you go into. But the immature expression of Poseidon could be very stormy emotions, and could be very emotionally erratic. But Poseidon is about letting your deeper being be expressed and letting that deeper power of your emotions transform your life. Then the next goddess of water is Aphrodite, or Venus. She, of course, is the goddess of beauty. She's the goddess of romantic love. She's also was known, you know, as the goddess of kind of promiscuous love, you know, not being tied down to a relationship. So she's very much at odds with Hera. You know, Hera is about creating the stability. Aphrodite is about exploring, enjoying sex, enjoying sensual love, enjoying the sensual beauty of the world. And she's, you know, therefore also the goddess of beauty, flowers, you know, beautiful landscapes, the ability to appreciate beauty. And in a relationship sense, she is about that beauty and that infatuation that we all experience when we fall in love initially. So it's that initial awe and wonder and joy and lightness that happens at the beginning of relationships. Next, we've got Artemis, who is the goddess of the hunt. She's the goddess of forests. She's the goddess of curiosity and kind of running wild. So, you know, if in life you need freedom, you want to get out of a relationship perhaps, or if you're very happy outside of a relationship, you might want to work with Artemis. You know, if your life feels too constrained, if you've got too much Athena, let's say, you know, too many structures, too much, you know, head stuff, you would want Artemis to run wild, to enjoy nature, to enjoy the forests, to go beyond your old limits. You know, being the goddess of the hunt, that is about, on the one hand, you know, being curious and, you know, sort of throwing a broad net. But then on the other hand, you know, once you've been curious and kind of seen what's out there, then you can start to focus on your target and really go for what's important and go for what you love, or go for what your heart calls you to. So that we can already start to see, for example, we've got very different expressions of a feminine energy. We've got very different goddesses. We've got Hera, who is about creating stable relationships. We've got Aphrodite, which is about exploring love and sex. We've got Artemis, who's about running free. We've got Athena, who's very much about being independent. And the same goes for some of the male gods that we've looked at this point. We've got Apollo, who's more the artist. We've got Hephaestos, who's more the craftsman and the alchemist. And then we've got Ares, who's kind of just the wild man in a sense, or the wild person with lots of raw energy. And then we've got Hermes, who's the trickster and the traveler, and kind of moves around and doesn't really establish strong roots. Whereas Zeus, the king of the gods, is very much about the roots and the authority and sort of creating space in the world. So again, we've kind of got a nice variety and different types of gods and goddesses. The next one here is Eros-Phanes. That's the god of love. And in mythology, he is usually associated with Aphrodite. So there we have, the arrows of Eros make us fall in love, possibly in inappropriate ways or circumstances. So Eros represents erotic love. The word erotic comes from Eros. And maybe he's less of a freestanding archetype, but he would be, compared to Aphrodite, he would just represent love in its purest sense. Aphrodite might represent sensuality and beauty and so forth. If you just need pure love in your life, if you want to attract a relationship, that would be the Eros energy that you would call in. It's about self-love first, it's about finding the self-love, and then allowing that self-love to bring a relationship in. So yeah, just to recap with the element of water, the gods and the goddesses there are very much about relationships, and that is what water is about. It's about relationships with ourselves, our inner emotions, and then it's our relationships with the people outside. Next, we're going to go to the gods of earth. We have Hades, who's the first god of earth, and Hades is actually the god of death, but more importantly, the god of transformation. Hades is about the invisible. It's about going into the deep depths of your own spirituality. It's about deep transformation, transforming your body or transforming a circumstance. It's literally dying to the old way and then being reborn in a new way. So he's the god of cleaning of the slates, letting go of all the stuff that you need to release, cleaning the slate, and then starting afresh. And don't let that aspect of being the god of death turn you off. That's not what he's about purely. It's more the transformational aspect. It's more about coming into a spiritual power, a spiritual connection, which gives new insight, which gives new energy in your life. And it's also very much about initiation. And the next two gods and goddesses, or actually the next two goddesses, Demeter and Persephone, which are related to each other but which are quite different, are the next ones. So Demeter is the goddess of abundance, of agriculture, but she's also the goddess of transformation. She's the guide that helps or that supports in the process of spiritual transformation especially. And she represents the growth of the seed, for example, that has been planted in the earth, which represents Hades. You need to go into the underworld to plant that seed. That seed then has its own message. That seed then has its own energy, which germinates and grows, and which then brings new life, brings transformation. And that is what this energy of Demeter is about, is planting the new seeds in our lives, those new seeds bringing abundance, but us kind of taking care of and cultivating what's important in our lives. They could be very spiritual, or it could be around abundance, cultivating abundance in our lives. But she's got a mothering, protecting energy, but the sort of mother that helps you transition into something new, that has your own best interests at heart, that you might need to go through a tough time, you might need tough love in order to grow, so she protects you through that. The goddess Hera, for example, she would keep everything safe and everything stable and not bring about a lot of change. Demeter is very much about bringing the change, but she's going to protect you and steward you through that process of change. Demeter's daughter Persephone was initially a goddess of spring and of flowers, but then she was abducted by Hades. Hades took her into the underworld, and at first, she was, mourning the loss. Demeter mourned the loss and created the seasons, and Persephone mourned the loss of herself, but eventually she became the queen of the underworld. So Persephone represents kind of the innocent, naive person being sort of really hit hard by life, by circumstances of life, and through that hardship also then learning to come into her own power. So in that sense, we can see that mother and daughter, Demeter and Persephone, are kind of quite similar. They're different aspects of that process of rebirth. Demeter's more the mother, Persephone is more the eternal child who is then reborn and finds her true power through that rebirth process. The last god in this series, the last god of earth, is Dionysos. And Dionysus is the god of, on the one hand, vegetation, raw, natural vegetation, the power of nature. Demeter is, cultivated nature, agriculture. Dionysus is the raw force of nature. But he is also very specifically the god of ecstasy and the god of altered states of consciousness. He's seen as the god of wine, or the god of, substances, psychedelics. He takes these psychedelics in order to grow. He enters the altered states of consciousness, which is breathwork. Breathwork is principally about entering an altered state of consciousness. So Dionysus enters the altered states of consciousness in order to get inspiration direct from the source, to experience the divine directly. And in ways that, for example, Athena, who can be quite closed-minded, cannot do. Dionysus is about letting go and exploring the other side of the brain. Usually we're in the left side of the brain. Dionysus is about going into the right side of the brain so that we can really explore those deep sources of inspiration, of intuition, of knowing within ourselves, and that we can then have ecstatic experience. And of course, there are many different ways of having ecstatic experience. That might be psychedelics, it might be chanting, it might be dancing, like the sun dance with the Native Americans. There's many different ways of entering those trance states. Breathwork is one of the simplest, and it's definitely the most accessible way of entering the altered states of consciousness. So Dionysus rules that transformation that the altered state of consciousness brings. So there we can see with those earth gods and goddesses, they were about transforming the natural state, the earth, the solid, into something else through rebirth, through ecstasy. So the reason why I spoke about those gods and goddesses in some detail was, hopefully one or two of those have kind of spoken to you, or you get a sense of, what it is that you want to cultivate, or what it is that you need to explore in your own personal process. But again, remember, these archetypes are not only just about a little bit of, intellectual information. These are energies that we can then choose to interact with and channel in order to bring transformation into our lives. They are powerhouses of energy that can kind of uplift us and inspire us and carry us in our process of transformation.